Hello again. I would like to talk a little bit about archaeology from the ground down. This is a video series which you should have watched or be watching. Um, I've divided it into two parts, and as you go through the video, you should be going through the PowerPoint as you watch the video. That is, maybe pause it every once in a while and go through this. I thought I would give you a quick overview of Part 1, Archaeology from the Ground Down, Part 1. The video begins by talking with Lawrence Steger, or Larry Steger, a longtime archaeologist, taught at Harvard. I think he's retired now, but he talks about a tell, and here we see a picture of a tell. A tell is a large man-made hill or mound. You can see its unusual shape. This is human-made, and here you see a trench that's been cut by the archaeologists through it. So these are characteristics of the Middle East. You find tells. And you have also I think something on a website to look at, how to tell a tell. The video takes you to archaeological sites. That's why I like to use it, and lets you hear from some archaeologists themselves. It's produced by the Biblical Archaeology Society. And I think it's a useful video. That's why I have you buy it and watch it. At any rate, they go to Hatzor. This is a map that shows you where Hatzor is located, Tel Hatzor. And of course, this is mentioned in Joshua, the excavator, Ben Tor. He talks about a fire there and how it melts the bricks and the temperature it takes to do that was caused by the oil that caught on fire. These are the biblical texts. You can take a look at that for yourself. Who caused the fire? Ben Tor says there's four choices: Egypt, Sea Peoples, Canaanites, or Israelites. And then he goes through the evidence very quickly as to why he thinks it's the Israelites, because Egyptian statues were destroyed, Canaanite statues were destroyed, and there's no evidence of any Philistine or Sea Peoples pottery. So he concludes it's the Israelites. And then a discussion comes up over why someone would be, some archaeologists and others, would be unlikely to want to say that it's Israel. Why not say that it's Israel? Because there's a kind of anti-biblical element, not only within archaeologists, but to be quite honest, within biblical scholarship in general. People do not want to take the Bible at its word. They want to take it at face value. They think that it has been a compilation, that sort of thing. So Ben Tor talks about this, and part of the sort of anti-view within archaeologists, anyway, is that a lot of the early archaeologists very much wanted to prove the Bible true. And so this leads into a discussion of minimalism and maximalists. And I don't have time to go into it, especially in this abbreviated presentation, but minimalists want to accept the very minimal amount of what the Bible says. In other words, you would, as we talked about with Yamauchi's spheres and all that we talked about earlier, if you remember that, only if I could find proof of it outside of the Bible would I accept anything that's inside the Bible. Okay, I'd have to have an inscription, I'd have some outside text or something. Then I would accept what the Bible said if it matched up what the outside sources say. The maximalist would say we're going to accept what's in the Bible completely and totally. So it's true. So this controversy then is there, and it's there not only in archaeological studies. It really comes to a head there because we're dealing with the material, but it's there too in all the biblical studies. So basically, this comes down to the idea of that the Old Testament especially was a compilation of oral stories. In the 6th century BC, it was compiled by 4 main editors. And I'm not going to go through that anymore now. But early archaeologists are viewed by many today as amateurs and having a quote-unquote biblical agenda, trying to prove the Bible is true. Now, William Deaver, spent some time on this video as well. You might be interested to know that he actually is an alumnus of Milligan College. His father taught at Lincoln Christian College. In fact, at one time, The Deaver family lived in Grayson, Kentucky, and Bill Deaver's father preached at the what's now is the First Church of Christ in Grayson. Anyway, he says that we do have evidence, for example, but it doesn't fit the timeline of the conquest at 1200 BC. Now, there's some assumptions here. First of all, that the conquest was at 1200 BC. Some people argue that it was in 1447 BC. That would adjust the evidence. There's a lot of interpretation that goes into archaeology, as in all biblical studies, and so we have to be aware of the issues as we look at it. Then they take us to Jezreel, where we meet David Ushishkin, the excavator. Jezreel is in the Jezreel Valley, as you see it here, and here's located down here on this map, not far from Megiddo. Megiddo near Mount Carmel. This is the pass, Megiddo Pass, very famous pass. A lot of battles fought there. And Megiddo near the mountain of Megiddo, or Har Megiddo, or Armageddon. That's where we get that word from. At any rate, what Ushishkin is talking about is Jezreel, the city, and this is the time of the divided kingdom. Ahab and Jezebel. Jezebel was thrown out of the window, as you remember. He talks about that. And then David Ushishkin has excavated here, and he has found a gate and a tower. Was it the tower that Jezebel was thrown out of? Well, we can't say that definitively, but it does date to the appropriate period. So the evidence then for archaeology, if we take a look at it, Steger says we should approach archaeology by examining the written text, the non-written evidence. I'm going to go through this quickly. And then this is something that's really not in the video. At least they mentioned the Gezer calendar, and I put up a lot of information about the Gezer calendar along with a depiction of the text itself. I'm going to let you go through that, what it says here, how it relates to 2 Kings. Then a discussion of Sir Flinders Petrie, really one of the leaders in archaeology of Syro-Palestine and Egypt. He excavated a lot in Egypt, and he's really the guy that came up with using stratigraphy, or those layers we were talking about earlier, to help date things along with pottery. He taught in London, the University College. He's the one who discovers the Merneptah stele that we will mention later on. And the superimposition principle, that is, that something that's on top of something else is dated later. In other words, this layer was laid down before this layer, and so this is newer than this, if that makes sense. That's superimposition. He works at Tel El Hesi in Palestine. This is a famous site for that, and he goes through all the pottery and the ceramic typology we've talked about in the stratigraphy, and he takes a look at the form and the function and see how it changes over time and begins to group them. Then relative and absolute chronology, we have talked about that, so I won't talk about it here. I'll let you listen to the video and look this over. Have Israel Finkelstein talking about this. And then the Coke bottle analogy. I believe this is Larry Steger uses this term, that the Coke bottle changes its size, somewhat its shape, and certainly what it's made out of over time. Starting off in small glass bottles, getting to bigger glass bottles, then to plastic bottles, aluminum cans, and so forth. By knowing that change in style and material, it's the same with pottery, okay, and also the decorations on it change with time. Okay, have to move on. Stratigraphy. Here we see a site with a lot of layers there. You can see a fire pit here. You can see a plaster floor. It's all tagged and layered. These strata then are the different layers. You have to remove the material completely. So for example, with a pit like this, you don't just take a level piece off. You'd have to excavate the whole pit and get it all out of there to make sure that what's in this, which this is a later thing than this layer. So you'd have to excavate all this out so this stuff doesn't get mixed in with this, and therefore you date this layer to a later period, what's in this area here. Well, anyway, these are done, and we see bulks that are drawn and section drawings that are drawn. Then we go to Megiddo. Megiddo, really an amazing site. The goal here was to completely excavate the site. University of Chicago had a lot of money. They were going to do it. They ran out of money. First of all, the Depression hit, and really what stopped them was World War I. And then they had to abandon it. But as you can see, they worked on it for 14 years, and their goal was to excavate the whole site. They made a major cut down through the site. Here's the team that worked on it, the Oriental Institute. And here is a model of the site, and here is a sort of a aerial view of the site and where it's located over here. It's being re-excavated, has been re-excavated in part by Finkelstein and Ushishkin and others trying to redate the chronology of the site. Here's a picture of the site. Another major person that's mentioned here is William F. Albright, really the premier American Near Eastern archaeologist, I would say. He taught at Johns Hopkins for 30 years and was a longtime director of the American Schools of Oriental Research in Jerusalem. He excavated Tel Beit Mishim and expanded upon Petrie's ideas using excavation, ceramic typology, and stratigraphy. That's Albright. Here's Tel Beit Mishim. I tell you something about it, show you some pictures of it, which they don't give you too much of this in the video. And then Dame Kathleen Kenyon. So you're being introduced to several important archaeologists here, really sort of the Hall of Fame, I guess we might say, of archaeologists of this region. Dame Kathleen Kenyon, obviously British. She emphasized stratigraphy and vertical exposure. This is going to be something that's discussed in the video. The vertical exposure as opposed to the horizontal exposure. The Israelis tend to do the horizontal exposure. They come down on a certain period, especially Iron Age, and they want to expand out because that really relates most to Israeli history or ancient Israel's history. Whereas Kenyon was doing sections. He was coming down doing vertical sections, deep, narrow trenches. And she worked at Jericho when it was controlled by Jordan. Yadin, an Israeli archaeologist, excavates at Masada and Megiddo and Hatzor. And former general, he does a lot of horizontal exposure. So these are the two schools of thought then. And what Ushishkin says he tries to do is the intermediate, where he's going to do both vertical and horizontal. And certainly this should be the goal of the archaeologist. You have to use different techniques when you discover different areas. So Ushishkin is the excavator here, and he says narrow trenches can miss important information, but of course if you go too horizontal you really can't put what you find in context. So here is Lachish, where Ushishkin has worked. Fascinating site, and you see it there, see the trench that he made there. And then there's a discussion of the Wheeler-Kenyon method. Mortimer Wheeler, Kathleen Kenyon. And this is a system which most American archaeologists use. Sorry for that interruption. We were talking about the Wheeler-Kenyon method. And this is basically a method where you divide a site into 5 by 5 meter squares. As you can see here, this is a 5 by 5 meter square, and then you excavate down. The bulks is material that's left. This bulk then allows you to preserve the stratigraphic history of the site, and then eventually, that after the bulk is drawn and so forth, you can excavate that area out as well. And if you put those bulks together, you would have a drawing. You can make a drawing of a section. All right, I'll continue this this part 1 in a different video. All right, thanks. Bye.